Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. Welcome to another weekly study. Today we're going to talk about periodization, and I'm pulling this from a question that was asked in the study group. Now this is going to be in chapter 11. So if you've got your textbook, good idea to kind of open up. I'm going to be actually pulling a couple of tables on the PowerPoint when I show it to you that are from pages 509, 510. Not a difficult point of discussion. Periodization, just so you understand from a sort of historical perspective in the athletic arena, has been around for, forever, really. We've used some sort of periodization type of scheduling in athletic training for a very, very long time. Now, there is some level of sophistication that has occurred over the years, but really, for the most part, the concept has been around, hasn't changed a whole lot. Like I say, there's some minor specifics that have changed over the decades, but for the most part, a very straightforward concept, and that's why Ace has it in the book. But again, chapter 11, which is going to be on integrated exercise programming from evidence to practice, speaks about it, and there are questions on the test. And like I say, this topic is coming from one of the students had asked and actually showed took a screenshot of one of the quiz questions. And that's what I want to go over with you. Remember, when you're going through any of these studies or the study guide, any of the materials that BDU offers to help you out, remember, I always keep a pad. And by the way, even the stuff that I continue to study for myself for advanced study, things like that, I do the same methodology from a studying perspective, which is read, write. Normally, I don't have to recite anymore, but I always recommend the audio component, saying it out to yourself, if that's going to help you. But for sure, to this day, I use pads, lots of pads, and I write the material down with a pen or a pencil. Quite often I will use colored markers, things like that. If I'm struggling with memorizing material. Remember, when all is said and done, your goal is to memorize the material for purposes of passing the exam itself. By the way, periodization, just so you know, from a real world perspective, if you're dealing with athletes or even individuals that are athletic, that are actually trying to achieve specific specific training goals, such as being able to lift a max weight. Not that I recommend that, but if that's what your client is really interested in doing, so be it. Periodization is critical, actually, for just about anybody, even the average client, in one sense, depending on whether you're doing one-on-one small group training. You can throw in sort of periodization scheduling in a more informal way. It's just variety, to be honest with you. What periodization really does for an athlete, for instance, is creates a scenario where you're not simply training the same thing workout after workout, week after week, month after month. And I'm not going to go into the entirety of the concept. You basically start off with what's known as a macro cycle. And macrocycles for athletes, just so you understand, macrocycles generally are going to be either 2 during the year or quite often with some track and field athletes that I used to train, it would be a single macrocycle that would take them through their postseason all the way up into just before whether it was indoor or outdoor type of competitions that they would be in. I would use periodization scheduling that could last anywhere from 5. These macro cycles could last anywhere from 5, again, depending on the athlete, 5 to even up to 8 months. The general understanding, and Ace will tell you that when you get to that part in chapter 11, 6 months, something like that. But again, it depends on the coach, depends on the strength coach, depends on the athlete, depends on the event, depends on a number of variables. But that's the real world part of it. So you have got these macro cycles, and then they're broken into what are known as mesocycles, and those are they could be 2 to 3 months long. But the reality is that even athletes, not just getting bored, but the reality that you can move into an overtraining scenario that doesn't allow for proper recovery. And so mesocycles are designed to break up the macro because they'll have different goals associated with them. And then the reality is that 2 to 3 months for a single sort of scheduled training program is a lot also, which is why you break them into micro cycles. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you on this PowerPoint, because what I did is I pulled, like I said, different tables just to give you an idea and just kind of show you what ACE is asking you to know. So periodization, there's your introductory slide. So let's just go ahead and move right into the periodization schedule. I'm gonna pull up a pen so I can kind of show you here what the deal is. Periodization schedules are generally broken into either a linear periodization schedule or what's known as an undulating periodization schedule. Either one of them works, to be honest with you. Again, it depends on the individual, depends on the ultimate goal. This is not athletic training. So in general, you can use either one of these with your clients. But again, periodization has a specialty nature to it that we normally are dealing with athletic clients. Let me tell you why this is important. In the real world, I've been doing this for a long time. And whenever I deal with athletes, they're machines. Athletes, they're just machines to me. And so you're in for a workout, you're there for a workout. You don't miss workouts unless you're sick. And so the reality from an athletic training perspective, for periodization, is that I can write an actual schedule and I can work on weights and volume and intensity, things like that, knowing full well that my robotic machine, they call them athletes, are actually going to show up and do the workout, and they're going to train at a certain level. Never have an issue with that. Well, look, in the real world, that just doesn't happen. The average client simply is not able to maintain normal levels of consistency the way an athlete would. And so therefore, for the average client, I'm not using a very specific periodization schedule. With that said, adding variety into your workouts when it comes to intensity and volume is always a good idea. So with that said, that's kind of an introduction to the introduction. What I want you to look at here is, and this is for the sake of the questions that you would see on an exam. Now, again, I'll go back to what the question asked on this quiz from one of the students in the study group. And this individual actually took a screenshot of it, and it was, here's what a new client. So you got a new client for the first 3 weeks, they're doing A, B, C, and D. And then the following 3 weeks, they would do this program. And of course, it was Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And it had a list of repetitions and weights that the individual, I think it was weights that the individual was doing. And all of that can be relatively confusing until you actually look at the most important variables between undulating and linear periodization. Now, there was another answer in there that confused this student, and the answer is perfect, because that's exactly what ACE is trying to do, is to kind of make sure you understand, the difference between the concept of what's known as overload training versus, and the answer, by the way, was undulating periodization, undulating linear, and then there was fartlek training, which is just a totally different way of setting up your workout, where you don't have a very structured way of doing your intensity and volume. That's a whole nother discussion. And so that's why you see me kind of toggling here back and forth on page. And here's what I want to do on page 373 in chapter 9 is where you get the definition of overload. So I just want to get rid of that response right off the bat. Whenever you see a question, generally, that has an actual rep and set scheme to it, more than likely, you're dealing with program design, specific program design, which is probably going to be periodization, especially since the answer had both linear periodization, then fartlek training, undulating, or I think it was undulating linear, and then overload training. Well, just so you know, overload training is a very general concept. So undulating periodization and linear periodization schedules is a way to apply progressive overload. So the fact that overload training was one of the responses does not mean that it was the best answer. Why? Because the actual schedule that it showed, the training program, was very specific. And as soon as you hit specificity to program design, the answer is not going to be overload training, because overload training can be anything. It could be periodization. By the way, overload training doesn't even have to be periodization training. So the point is that if you see any type of, in any quiz or question, if you see something like what I'm showing you here, it's going to be either linear periodization or what's known as undulating periodization. And by the way, if you've got your textbook open, you go back to page 508, it basically explains to you this concept of macro, meso, and then micro cycle. The concept itself, like I was saying, is very applicable generally in athletic training. And then it's figure 1129. And I've had students tell me that this is a little confusing. And so I'm going to say go ahead and take a look at figure 1129, but it's not going to be as helpful as the actual charts of what I'm going to show you here. So essentially, whenever you're looking at periodization, you have to remember that you're generally, now this is ACE is doing this. I'm not sure I worked in, 2-week cycles. Generally with athletes, I would work in anywhere between 3, sometimes 4. And again, depending on their ability to recover from training and whatever their sport was, sometimes I would work my micro cycles in 5-week increments. It just depended, but that's not relevant. The point is that you're trying to pass the ACE exam. So let's get back to that. So the microcycles, the key to remember here between linear and undulating is very, very simple. Take a look across, across the row. Microcycle 1, microcycle 2. Look at the poundage in a linear periodization. The goal is to maintain consistency in your micro cycle. 140 pounds, 12 repetitions. There it is, 140 pounds, 12 repetitions. There it is. That's a week. That's your microcycle, that's 2 weeks. So essentially you come, and by the way, ACE will tell you, this is just for one exercise, by the way. I think they talked about bench press. So the idea is that you choose your exercise and then you set up a schedule that says, when I come in on Monday, whatever the case is, it could be Monday, Thursday, whatever it is, it's not relevant, is that you're always making modifications to your volume and, quote, your intensity. So the idea then is that within the microcycle, linear periodization, very straightforward, is across the board. It's going to be the same. Now, the next week, because generally in this type of scenario, you'll notice the goal is to hit a max, a 1 rep max after, whatever, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. After 12 weeks, you want to hit a max, right? And so you're going to start out at 140 pounds and use 140 pounds for up to 12 reps. Now, here's what happens is that the next week, go up generally now I used to, depending on the exercise, I would normally jump up 10%. ACE will say 5%. Again, that's not what's important. You would figure that out in the real world with your particular client or athlete. The point is that every microcycle changes the weight repetitions, as you can see, boom, 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 and they go straight across the board. Everything's the same straight across. So that's linear periodization. Undulating periodization, basically now that you've seen this, now you can see the difference, right? Across the row, what do you notice? Within the microcycle, we are making modifications to the weight and repetitions. That's all it is. So within the microcycle now, within a 2-week time frame, we're moving from 140 to 160 to 180, right? So within the microcycle, we've changed or we've undulated, right? Undulation means the rising and falling, up and down movement of whatever variable it is you're talking about. And so again, microcycle 1 varies the weight from 140 on Monday to 160 on Wednesday, 180 on Friday, whereas in the linear, we stayed at 140. This is what we're doing for these 2 weeks, 140 pounds. Now, again, don't ask me the question of, well, why, what if I can do more That's not the point. I want you to answer the question correctly on the exam. That's the key here. Microcycle 2 is another, again, 2 weeks. You can see what's happening. So 12, 8, and 4 reps. And now when we get down to microcycle 4, now we've essentially upped the ante by 140 to 155. So 10% is 14 pounds. Yeah, that's about a, right? That's about a 14 pound. That's about a 10% increase in weight, which is pretty much standard. It could be 15 repetitions. You could start at 6 repetitions. When I used to train power lifters, generally 12 would be too much. We would normally max at either 8 or 10 reps. But the point is, and then we would pull it down to triples and pull for a single max after normally anywhere from 12 to 16 weeks, depending on competitions. And so that's the basic concept here. So here, linear, we're staying at 140 with 12 reps or whatever the case is. Down with the undulating, we're basically upping it from 140 to 160. And then every week we're doing this and we're upping our weight, but modulating our repetitions. So technically, if you're not going to use resistance in your volume variable, you're just using repetitions, then you're modulating your volume down, but you're upping your intensity because your resistance is heavier. Please remember, volume versus intensity. Hope that makes, you can read that. Volume, let me put a little dot there. Volume versus intensity. The reason in general, in the real world, we use undulating periodization is because it gives us a little more flexibility in how we can vary the volume and the intensity. Because remember, if I can do 12 reps with 140, and I'm feeling really good on Wednesday, and I know I've got 160 on there for 8 reps, technically I could try for 9, maybe even 10 reps. And if I'm able to get that, what does that tell me then about the next microcycle? Remember, the next microcycle has me at the same, if you notice, it's the same, although I covered it up, I apologize, has the same volume and intensity. But technically, you could actually make, modifications kind of on the, you can wing it in one sense, even though I have it written down for my microcycle to be this weight with this many repetitions, I can make changes as needed. So I hope that makes sense. Let me jump out of the share, and just keep in mind the goal with the concept of periodization. Number one, pass the test, get the answer correct on the test. In general, okay, recap. If you see questions that ask something related to programming in this respect, and you can go ahead and watch it on the Facebook page or look at it on the Facebook page if you haven't seen it yourself when you're doing your personal study with the quizzes, is when you see this linear versus undulating periodization, is that within the microcycle, it always comes down to what's happening in the microcycle, meaning that week's worth of workouts. If you get a question that doesn't give you that level of specificity, well, then it may be related to muscle strength training variables, right? Such as the concept of overload. It may be something like that. But as soon as you see a question that gives you that level, that granular specificity, where it is literally showing you this client has a workout schedule of week 1, this, and this, and you see that there are weight or repetition variations Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, whatever it is, you know that it's undulating, right? Because it's a variation within the microcycle. But if it says the same weight on Monday, same repetition, same weight on Wednesday, whatever, and Friday, then you know that it's linear periodization. And then again, keep in mind, overload, the concept of overload training is just a very general concept that speaks to how a muscle needs to be trained from a strength training perspective, needs to be progressively overloaded from a resistance perspective. And again, that can be conducted in a linear periodization schedule or an undulating periodization schedule. So pretty straightforward. And look, if you have any questions and you need more information, just remember to post comments below the video. Keep in mind that BDU, we're here to help you pass the ACE exam on the first attempt. Remember, you can actually subscribe to our page. And if you want to get the notifications, then you can ring the bell at the bottom below this on this YouTube video. So just keep in mind, ACE is going to ask you for sure a question or two, or even more, related to some of these program design components. Just want to make sure that you got that. So remember to notify us, let us know, post more questions inside the group, and we can do an actual study on it. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. See ya.